Can you guys tell me where we left off? Did we look at the lid of the sarcophagus of Lord Pakal?
No, we left off with that city with the
Teotihuacan?
yeah.
Alrighty then. All right, we're still in chapter 18, part 2. We're starting part 2 today, and we are going to look at the Mayans. The Mayan culture takes up pretty much most of the Yucatan Peninsula. And the Mayans came into, I don't want to say power, but they came into existence and then they vanished before European contact. They were a highly developed civilization. They constructed cities, civic buildings, roads, bridges, irrigation. And the 16th century European invaders left most of these civilizations in ruins. Others were abandoned due to forces of nature. They had a highly developed written language. This is their writing right here. It's done in pictographs, very similar to the Egyptians, where the Egyptians used pictures instead of symbols. And you probably heard of the Mayan calendar. It's very accurate, and they had also very accurate astronomy. And this indicates very sophisticated mathematics. The calendar was radically different, but just as accurate as the European calendar. The only true written history of the ancient America. Like I said, there wasn't much written, especially with the Olmecs. So, and the Teotihuacan, there was very little written, so it was hard to tell the history of them before European contact. Only the Mayan calendar worked as well as our calendar. And the Mayans were obsessed with time, religion, and they were uninterested in everyday life. The rulers claimed that they were descended from the gods, and that is very similar to other civilizations that we looked at. The civilizations of the not the Mesoamericans, Mesopotamians, they had the priest king. So the priest and the king were one and the same. With Egypt, we had Horus occupying the body of the pharaoh. So religion and the kingship were unified for the Mayans, and it had a very strong hold on society. The Mayan civilization lasted about 1,000 years and ended in 900 AD, and it was an abrupt vanish, and there's no real reason for it, or the archaeologists and art historians have not found a reason for it. It's unaccountable why they just disappeared. Before recently, it was believed that the Mayan civilization was a peaceful civilization. It was seen as benign. But recent discoveries have showed that the Mayans were a warlike people. They were very fierce, and they waged war on each other, and they engaged in human sacrifice. All right, so we're going to go to Palenque, and here are some images of what Palenque would have looked like back then. Again, these places were polychrome. They used the same sort of painting materials and colors as what we saw in Teotihuacan. This is the ruins as they are now. And we're going to go and just for fun, we're going to take a look at the Temple of the Skull. And if we go up there, there's this, at the base of one of the posts, there is this skull image, which I think is pretty cool. It represents the afterlife. And temples were entryways into the afterlife. They're places where you could access the underworld. And going to the underworld is how you access immortality and rebirth. We're going to go to one of these temples, and there's a series of temples built on top of each other. For example, this one right here, this was not the first temple built here. They didn't say, oh, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say 10 layers and put a temple on top. No, it was maybe one layer with a temple on it. And then they came in and built, they built over that. And it was 5 layers with a temple on top. And so it's just one temple after another built on top of each other. There's inscriptions in the doorways, and most of them are very difficult to decipher. But this one right here shows ancestors presenting infants. Inside the temple, there would have been a tomb. So this is the combination of a ziggurat and an Egyptian pyramid, where the ziggurat was just a raised platform for the temple to get it taller and closer to the gods, and the pyramid was the tomb. It had a stairway inside. So it combines the purposing of both the ziggurat and the Egyptian pyramid. So we're going to go down into the tomb of Lord Pakal, and we're going to look at the lid of the sarcophagus of Lord Pakal. Everybody knows what a sarcophagus is, right? It's like a coffin. I'm going to go get my laser pointer. All right, so as we get closer, we can see the details of it, but it's still rather difficult to see. Why is it so difficult to see? Did I hear it? Low relief. Yeah, low relief makes things difficult to see. If it was high relief, it could really see the image on here. So we have an illustration to help us understand this lid of the sarcophagus of Lord Pakal. So down here is the underworld, and it's mask-like. You can see it looks like 2 eyes and a nose and the mouth right here, and almost like the mandibles of a beetle up here. Lord Pakal is in a fetal pose, and they're wondering if he is falling into the underworld, and he's being consumed by the underworld. And a tree is coming out from his body. That's what's in the yellow. And the tree connects all the worlds together, and there's a cosmic bird at the top. All right, moving on. We're going to go to the Yucatan Peninsula, and you should know that area. We're going to go to Jaina, which is an island. Jaina. Am I pronouncing it right? Is it hyena? There's an elite Mayan burial site settled in 300 AD, abandoned in 1200 AD, and it's in ruins, but there is still a ball court. There's 20,000 graves there. 1,000 of them had been excavated, and there's lots of human remains and objects. We're going to look at the clay figures that have been found there. You know what? That belongs in another part of this slide is out of place. I'm so sorry. I'm going to fix it right now. Yeah, we're going to spend a long time in Tikal. Yeah, this slide is really out of place. Oh, it's been duplicated. All right. I copied and pasted without deleting the first one. All right. Let's try this again. We're going to go to Tikal. This is Tikal from the air, and you can see the ruins poking up out of the forest. And here is a tourist map of Tikal. So when you go to visit Tikal as a tourist, these maps help you to find your way around. Originally, it covered 75 square miles with a population of 75,000, and it is not in a grid plan like Teotihuacan. The remains of 3,000 structures are in an area of 6 square miles. That's a lot. And this is what it would have looked like back then. Again, it was polychrome, it was painted. All the buildings are aligned to the 4 directions. The north represents the sky, the south represents the underworld, the land of the dead. The east is the rising sun, life and rebirth, and the west is the gates of death. That's where the sun goes to die every day. The east is where the sun is reborn every day. Here's the Great Plaza. We'll take a look at this in a moment. This is what it would have looked like back then. Or this is what an artist thinks it would have looked like back then. Again, we're going to focus on the northern Acropolis, this area right here. And we're going to focus on these 2 temples right here. I want you to notice these 2 pyramids. The one on the left is called Temple 1. The one on the right is called Temple 2. Crazy creative names for these. I don't know how you're going to remember them. The temple on the left is a mortuary temple for Jasa Chan Kawil. He was buried below the temple. Notice that Temple 1 is taller than Temple 2. And so if we take a look at what it looks like now and what it might have looked like back then, this is the Temple of the Giant Jaguar. Isn't that a better name than Temple 1? It is 144 feet tall. It is a mausoleum for the Tikal ruler. It's a mortuary temple. And this was built as is. This is very rare. This temple was built from the ground up like this. It's not a temple on top of another temple on top of another temple. It has an elaborate roof comb, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Again, the body of the ruler is in a vaulted chamber underneath the pyramid base. It has 9 levels, and I believe those 9 levels are a reference to the 9 stages of the afterworld. And the temple has 3 chambers inside of it. And this temple is a perfect example of pre-Columbian Mesoamerican formula for a stepped temple. The pyramid and compelling aesthetic and psychological power of the Maya architecture. It is the most impressive pyramid in Tikal. Most temples face east. The Great Jaguar, or Temple 1, faces west. It faces the sunset, and it faces the temple of his wife. So I know what you're thinking. How did the Mayans build these pyramids? So I found this video that shows an illustration of how they built the pyramid. So here is a raised platform. And if you look, it looks like they built walls with little rooms in it, and they filled the rooms with stones. And then they would cover it to make it flat, and then they would build a smaller version of the walls with little rooms and fill it with stones. And eventually it would get to the top and they would build their temple. And then notice the corbelled arch. We looked at that with the Aegean culture. And I don't believe that the Mayans ever met the Aegeans, but yet they were able to have the exact same sort of architecture. And that's just how technology works. I guess that's a bad way to say that. Placing stones on top of each other and putting one just to the inside is a logical thing to do to create this corbelled arch. So it's not just the Greeks that figured it out, but the Mayans figured it out as well. Remember that term. All right, and I bet you're also wondering, why are some pyramids bigger than others? Each king built a pyramid and they wanted to outdo the previous king. So when you're trying to outdo the previous king, you make yours taller and bigger. So we can assume from that the taller and bigger ones are the newer temples, whereas the shorter temples are the older ones. So here's an example of how they built one temple on top of another. So you can see on the left, there is a temple on top of this raised platform, and then somebody built another temple on top of that. And then somebody built another temple on top of that. So you just build taller and bigger. You outdo the previous people. All right, this is Temple 2. Again, another fantastic title for this artwork. So creative. It has fewer levels, so that means it's shorter. It has a roof comb. I want you to know what a roof comb is. It's that thingamabobber right there. The roof comb is a vertical architectural projection that once bore the ruler's giant portrait modeled in stucco. So here is an artist's interpretation of what it might have looked like. Roof combs are like headdresses for the temples. I think these things are pretty cool. This one is a ruler on his throne. You know what the funny thing though is, you wouldn't be able to see much from standing way down at the bottom. All right, so we've looked at the Temple 1 and Temple 2. We're going to look at the Temple of the Lost World way over yonder. I know, right? All right, so we're going to go to the Temple of the Lost World. So let's pretend that Robocop is a Mayan priest. If he stands on the Temple of the Lost World and the sun rises over this piece of architecture, that is the winter solstice. If the sun, if he stands on there and the sun rises over this one, and that is the equinox. And if he stands on the Temple of the Lost World and the sun rises over this structure, it is the summer solstice. So the Mayans were also stargazers, and the priests were also stargazers. Okay, and then let's go back to the main complex, and I want you to notice all these things down here. What are those? The courtyard is lined with steles and altars. And the altar is related to the stele that it is in front of. Each one represents a different king, and they tell the stories of kings, their victories, their marriages, their deaths. So, this is how a stele is created. Notice that they are carving this rectangular piece of stone out of the ground, and they're able to lift it up, put it on rollers, and move it, and then they uh, erect it and then carve it. So here's one example. This is another great title, Tikal Stele 16. It depicts Jasa Chan Kawil, a ruler of Tikal. He would have been brightly painted. What do we call that? Polychrome. And the body, frontal, head profile, this emphasizes his wealth and power, the jewelry and the clothes. Again, it's low relief, very hard to decipher. We can see his head area, all right, his headdress. There he is. There's his portrait down here. And he has this elaborate headdress on. And you can see the faces of gods on the headdress. And then also, I haven't made any slides for it, but feathers were a big deal in the Mayan culture. They had these bright bluish green feathers from a bird that had those feathers. All right. Down below, on his chest is the pectoral. Then there's a bar below that, and there's this belt that has his ancestor on it. And then he has those are elaborate sandals. All right. Has anybody seen Star Wars? The original one. They filmed it in Tikal. Check this out. All right, that's a clip from the movie. So I found some pictures where it shows that they set up actually on the temple to film that, but look at how steep the steps are. Like that is incredibly steep. Anyways, when people go there, they get Star Wars crazy. All right, already talked about this one, so we're gonna go into. Is that also out of place? No, it's not. All right. I need to erase the. Oh, I know what I was doing. The slide is good, but the notes are bad. The notes are all right. I got you. I got you, Brian. I see what you're doing. All right. We're going to go to Yashilan. Yashchilan. All right, Yashchilan. I've heard it pronounced Yashchilan, and I've heard it pronounced Yashilan. So there is a series of buildings next to a river, and we're going to go and take a look at this one right here. Now, I want you to notice that this is, I don't want to say a post and lintel system because the two posts are made of multiple bricks. It's not one monolith, but that is certainly a lintel going across. And that lintel has a relief sculpture on it. This is not our artwork, but I'm just showing you where our artwork comes from. And we're going to take a look at Shield Jaguar and Lady Zoc. This one's a cool one. First of all, I like it because it is a deeper relief sculpture. It's a higher relief. We can actually see what's going on. And what's going on is crazy. Well, crazy to us, in their culture, this would have been perfectly sane. All right, so this is lintel number 24. I'm glad they changed the name to Shield Jaguar. It shows an incredible naturalism by the artist at Yashulan. Shield Jaguar is holding a torch over the head of Lady Zoc. Lady Zoc is the main character, not Shield Jaguar. I'm going to zoom in on something right here. All right, so look at what that is. Can you see what that is? Yeah, it's almost like barbed wire, but it's like a rope with thorns in it. All right, and look at what she's doing with it. She's made a hole in her tongue, and she is pulling the rope with thorns through her tongue. What do you think that's going to do? Yeah, it's going to make her bleed. That's the point, for her to bleed. This is called auto sacrifice, which we'll get to momentarily. All right, I'm going to go back to this one. All right, so she's pulling a rope with barbs through her tongue. Men would do this on their genitals. This is bloodletting. This is a sacred ritual. And they would allow these rulers to communicate with the gods. The bleeding or the blood will drip down to the book below that's made of bark paper. And the bark paper would then be burned as part of the ritual. All right, so here is Shield Jaguar. I want you to look at his profile, and I want you to look at where the forehead connects with the ridge of the nose and see how it makes one solid line. It's very different than most people would have an indentation in their head right where the eyes are. Like it goes in, and then we have our brow that comes out a little bit. But the Mayan ideal of beauty, this should be a straight line. And you can see it in their artworks where their standard of beauty, their ideal of beauty, is that there is no bump in the nose where the eyes are. And they will wear jewelry to make that transition from the nose to the forehead a single solitary line. All right, we are still in the Yucatan Peninsula, and now we're going to go to the Jaina Islands. And we're going to look at some sculptures that are made from molds. Do you know what a mold is? You make a sculpture and then you put like plaster around it. You pull the plaster off. It's just like the same as when we do bronze casting, right? Make a mold around it, heat it up, the wax comes out, the metal goes in, and then you break the mold apart. In this case, you make a mold, and then you have this empty space on the inside that is the shape of the sculpture. And instead of pouring in molten metal, you pour in liquid clay. And then when you pour it out, you'll have the clay will stick to the outside of the outside of the inside of the mold, and it'll be a hollow figure. These molds are not found on not all found on the island. Jaina figures are found inland and have the same style and process. Many are hollow and fitted with a whistle or a rattle, and they are burial accompaniments. And many of them have blue paint on them, and that's called Maya blue. It's clay mixed with indigo, a vegetable dye. And so these figures are pretty interesting. And like when I said before that Mayans don't show daily life, but here we have either a scribe or somebody weaving a fabric. Again, look at that nose ridge. That's that single solitary line from forehead to the tip of the nose. And they're wondering if these are portraits or if they are meant to be ancestors, but they're all very expressive and individual. That means that it's not the same figure over and over again. Some are seen as deities. You have women weaving, you have old men, you have dwarves. And that Mayan blue pops up a lot. But we're going to focus on this guy right here. He's very expressive, and I don't know if you have. Well, I'll be explaining the sport of the Mayan ball game later, but he is dressed up like one of their ball players. Is he dabbing? Is that is that an epic and ancient dab? Yeah, like he's even kneeling for it. I mean, that's he's throwing 100% into that dab. All right, back of the Yucatan Peninsula, we're going to go to Bonampak. And we're looking for a building. There it is. All right, the Temple of the Mural. There it is. So, and we get as we get closer, and we can see a model of what it was in, like in the inside. It has a corbelled vault like the others. The temple is divided into three chambers, and inside the chambers, there are paintings on the inside walls. Room one has the best preserved Mayan murals. And this is the site that debunked the idea that Mayans were peaceful. This mural depicts war and human sacrifice. The upper register are the gods and deities. The middle register is the presentation scene. And the bottom register is the celebration. Here's the presentation scene. A child is being presented. And notice how we have figures of different sizes. Each has a different headdress and decoration. And they're all interacting with each other. People are making elaborate back fans. The lower level has musicians with massive horns. Room 2 has the greatest action scene in all of Mayan art. There are battle scenes on the long wall, spills out into the shorter walls. It has remarkable dynamic and energetic composition, and that is unique for this time period. And here is the subjugation scene in room 2. Warriors are surrounding captives on a terraced platform, and they are presenting captives to the rulers. They have naturalistic proportions, and the painting technique is a cross between tempera paint and fresco. And the inscriptions tell precise date of the event, and this is just after those dates the site was abandoned. The prisoners are cutting and biting themselves, and they're offering blood to the king. Pretty soon, I'll be explaining why the reason for all this blood. Room 3 has presentations and a preparation for the royal feast, dancing, battle, taking of prisoners, and sacrificing of prisoners. This is an elaborate preparation for the ceremony. Women are bloodletting their tongues. They're bleeding into a bucket with a codex in it. On all occasions of state, they do bloodletting. And the ruler, the consort, members of nobility drew blood from their own bodies and sought union with the supernatural world. This bloodletting, everybody did it. The rulers did it, the common people did it, everybody did the bloodletting. The slaughter of captives were taken in war were part of the ceremony. One reason for going to war is getting people to sacrifice during ceremonies. They forced captives to play a rigged game of fatal ball game, and they tortured and executed prisoners, and which nourished the gods and struck fear in enemies and the general populace. So on the left are the murals of Teotihuacan, and on the right are the murals of Bonampak, and you can see the difference. The ones on the right are much more realistic. The proportions are realistic, more realistic, and the scenes are a lot more easy to understand. All right, we're going back to the Yucatan Peninsula. We're going to go up to Chichen Itza. Chichen Itza is the most complicated of all the sites. Chichen Itza stands for, or it translates as, from the mouth of Itza. And at this location, emphasis is on the sacrificial and militaristic imagery. This is what it would have looked like back then. Again, it was polychrome. Chichen Itza does not have as many written records. The rulership was shared among nobles instead of a kingship, much like in Florence that we'll get to early next semester. There's a lot of these holes or these sinkholes. Chichen Itza is very lush, but it doesn't rain much here. So people are wondering where all the water comes from. Well, it comes from these sinkholes. And it's called a cenote or a chenote. I'm not sure which is correct. Does anybody know? The sinkholes are regarded as entrances into the underworld. And this is the reason why the site was built here. There are several sinkholes around, and now they are quite beautiful, and people will come and visit the sinkholes. But this one right here, the sacred cenote, I don't know. What is it? This was used for human sacrifice. Mayans threw objects and people in the sacred cenote. Infants and adolescents were purchased to throw into the cenote. Captives of war were thrown in. Many were killed before being thrown in. And it was to appease the rain god Chak. In other buildings along in the Chichen Itza, there are images of Chak, the rain god. And here is an old crane that was used to pull all of the stuff out of the sacred cenote. And you can see all the bones, the skulls, the pottery. Gold was found, jade was found. The skulls came from infants as well as adults. But now we're just going to swim in it. All right, now we're going to go to the main pyramid, which is El Castillo. And this is what it looked like when it was first discovered in 1892. Look how it was covered with vegetation. And it is the temple of Kukulkan. And Kukulkan is the same thing as Quetzalcoatl. So check out my amazing powers of PowerPoint. Look at this. Whoa. That's pretty cool. All right. That's Quetzalcoatl. Here's an artist rendering of what it would look like as a ruin. Oh, this photograph was taken in 1892. It was rediscovered in 1841. And here is the process of removing the vegetation from the temple. It has 4 staircases, and there's one main staircase that goes up to the main entrance right here. The main staircase goes, it's called the serpent staircase, and it goes up to the entrance of the temple. The other staircases, they go into this area that goes around the main. So if we're going to use a Greek art term, this would be the cella here in the center. And the other 3 staircases do not access the cella. Once again, this was a temple built on top of another temple. And it was built over 400 years. So a smaller temple, then a larger temple was built on top, and then a larger temple built on top of that. It is also built above an underground cenote. And there's a well going down into the cenote. Again, it would have been polychrome. And what's cool about this one, I'm going to back up. It was restored in 1924. So you're looking at the restoration of the temple. But we're going to, and then on the inside, in the actual temple, in the cella, would have been a chalk mule. And this is a figure that is in the shape of a man with the head turned 90 degrees. And this is the pose of somebody who would be a sacrificial victim. And the chalk mule is the best evidence of heart sacrifice. You can see there's like a table right there. And this gives you a sense of how large these chalk mule figures were. Also inside of this temple is a throne. It could be a throne, it could be an altar, or maybe a place for offerings. But here we go. Here's the cool part. So on the serpent staircase, this one right here, this one goes up to the main entrance of the temple. On a certain day, the shadow will show on here at the setting or rising sun, and it looks like a snake slithering down the stairs. It's called the snake of sunlight. And when you get up close, you can see the feathering out behind it. You can see in the low relief along there that has feathers. Again, a reference to Quetzalcoatl. We're going to watch about a minute of this ball game. The goal, all right, some people say that the goal is just to keep the ball moving. Some people say that the goal is to get it inside that hoop like a basketball. They're not allowed to use their hands or feet on the ball. They use their hips. And remember, as they fall down on that, that is stone. All right, it is a tough game. Oftentimes, they would have games in which the loser is sacrificed. And when they would go to war, they would get captives and they would make the captives fight, but it was a rigged game and they were going to be the losers and then they were going to be the ones that were sacrificed. So ball courts are found in many different Mayan and Aztec cities. So here's the ball court at Chichen Itza. And look at how high that hoop is. I don't like that would be even difficult to throw the ball through that hoop, let alone get it up there with your hip. Here's another cool thing at Chichen Itza is the skull wall that has these skulls on it, and the skulls are on these uh, uh, pikes, and we'll see a little bit more about that momentarily. All right, any questions about Mayan art? Okay, that ends chapter 18. And tomorrow we're going to do chapter 35. Is that right? It's 8 o'clock. This is a good time to stop. We get out of here at 8:06. That'll give you 6 minutes to work on your beast. I've had one person turn in their beast so far. It is due on Tuesday the 5th. For the people at Park, it is due, your teacher, Miss Brigg, needs to get it to me on the 5th.